Jacinda Ardern to govern New Zealand for second term after historic victory. Jacinda Ardern will govern New Zealand for a second term after the Labour Party secured a historic landslide victory in the general election, attracting so many votes it could become the first party in decades to be able to govern alone. Ardern's deft handling of the COVID-19 outbreak and resolute belief in science and experts was credited with earning the trust of New Zealanders, who turned out to cast early votes in record numbers, giving her party more votes than any other election in the past 5 decades. With nearly 100% of the vote counted, Labour had secured 49%, with the opposition National Party on 27%. Labour was expected to win 64 of the 120 seats in Parliament, and National 35. It is the best result for the Labour Party in 50 years, and is being hailed as extraordinary by the former Prime Minister Helen Clark, and mind-blowing by supporters. The leader of the opposition, Judith Collins, congratulated Ardern on the outstanding result on Saturday night, but refused to answer questions from reporters on whether she would stay on as leader. Speaking to a heaving crowd of 1,000 people at Auckland Town Hall, Ardern thanked the nation for the strong mandate. She said elections don't have to be divisive and promised to govern with cooperation and positivity, adding that New Zealand could set an example by showing elections don't have to mean people tear one another apart. She said, "We are living in an increasingly polarized world, a place where more and more people have lost the ability to see one another's point of view. I hope in this election New Zealand has shown that this is not who we are. And as a nation we can listen, and we can debate. After all, we are too small to lose sight of other people's perspective. Elections aren't always great at bringing people together, but they also don't need to tear one another apart. At times of crisis, I believe New Zealand has shown that. This has not been an ordinary election, and it is not an ordinary time. It's been full of uncertainty and anxiety, and we set out to be an antidote to that." The words were interpreted as a veiled allusion to the divisive U.S. election, due to take place in 2 weeks. Ardern had tears in her eyes as she took to the podium, and appeared moved by the remarkable show of support for her party and leadership. Earlier this week she had said she would quit politics if she was not re-elected. The first 30 seconds of Ardern's address was in fluent Maori, the language of New Zealand's indigenous people. To sounds of cheers, Ardern said, "I cannot imagine a people I would feel more privileged to work on behalf of, to work alongside and to be Prime Minister for. Tonight's result does give Labour a very strong and very clear mandate. It is an extraordinary night for Labour, which will not have to rely on a minor party to form a government, if it so chooses." This would make Ardern's 2020 government the first since 1996 to govern alone, giving it a seismic advantage to pass progressive policy on issues such as climate change, affordable housing and child poverty. In her first term as leader, Ardern struggled to enact the transformational change she had promised voters in 2017. It is understood she was stymied by her necessary coalition agreement with NZ First, a right-leaning, socially conservative minor party. They have now been decisively voted out of government, failing to meet the 5% threshold. Ardern has yet to decide if she will invite the Green Party into government, but even without them, the new government will be significantly more progressive and left-leaning than its previous iteration. The vote had become a referendum on Ardern's leadership of the country since her sudden ascension to power 3 years ago, when she morphed from a relative unknown backbench opposition MP into Prime Minister in less than 3 months. The dismal results for her opponents suggested New Zealanders had rewarded her for her deft handling of the pandemic, which has so far spared the country the worst of COVID-19, although it is now in a recession. Labour's strong lead began early on in the night, but as the hours passed the commanding lead continued. For months, opinion polls had pointed to a Labour victory, with the latest poll showing Labour 15 points ahead of National, which has been beleaguered by infighting and disunity. A record number of voters, nearly 2 million, cast their ballots in advance, accounting for almost half of the roughly 3.5 million New Zealanders on the electoral rolls. Collins, National's third leader this year, having taken over 3 months ago, often preferred to criticize Ardern's handling of the pandemic or plans for economic recovery, rather than promote her own policies. After coming to power in 2017, Ardern drew a mixed response in the polls, but she has since risen to become New Zealand's most popular Prime Minister of modern times, steering the country through crisis after crisis, including COVID-19. Although New Zealand is now in its worst recession in decades, Ardern's decision to close the borders and enforce a nationwide lockdown meant fewer than 2,000 people became infected with coronavirus and 25 people died. Ardern, who has become globally famous as a progressive leader, emphasized kindness and cooperation during her first term, and told voters she needed a second term to deliver on her promises of transformational change. During her first term, she banned future oil and gas exploration, increased paid parental leave, raised the minimum wage, and increased benefits for the most deprived New Zealanders. But she failed to deliver on some of her key pledges. She ditched the Kiwi-built affordable housing scheme, fewer than 500 homes were built out of an original 100,000 pledged, scrapped a proposed capital gains tax, and made minimal headway on child poverty. She defended her progressive record on Friday, telling an interviewer that change would not happen overnight. "I am not finished yet. I take some flattery in the idea that I would resolve a decades-long problem in 3 years, but I can't," she told Radio New Zealand of her child poverty record. A second term brings with it a slew of challenges for the Prime Minister, with the country facing a recession, poverty and benefit figures on the rise, and climate-related weather events becoming more common. Labour's dangerous strategy. Ardern's image and popularity have been at the forefront of Labour's re-election campaign, with one Labour social media ad saying a vote for the party would allow New Zealand to keep Jacinda as one of the top 10 reasons to vote for them. Analysts said it was a risky strategy for the party in the long term. "It's not clear what they've done and what they're still planning to do," said Jennifer Lees-Marshman, a politics professor from Auckland University. "She's not trying to win a mandate, she's not trying to win anyone over, so while this appears safe for Labour, it's actually a very dangerous strategy." Susan St. John, a researcher for Child Poverty Action Group, said the Ardern government had failed to rein in excessive wealth, to the detriment of the country's poorest. There had been small improvements to low incomes but no transformative step changes, St. John said. Government promises on prioritizing child poverty led to very modest reduction targets that are looking less achievable on the current settings amid the COVID-19 recession. Election fatigue was pronounced throughout the long weeks of campaigning, with voters and politicians alike seeming to have no appetite for dog-eat-dog politics in the midst of a global pandemic. But it was Labour's promise to deliver stability for voters, usually a National Party slogan, that proved decisive, with many New Zealanders feeling too uncertain to shake up the government after such a trying year. Ardern has promised to have child poverty by 2030, tackle the climate crisis and build more state housing. She has also promised to resuscitate the economy after a strict 7-week nationwide lockdown. Collins crushed. While Collins, a veteran politician, was a known quantity, she was also divisive, loved and loathed in equal measure. Her upbeat energy appeared to flag in the final week of the campaign as her defeat looked ever more certain, and she will now likely face a fight for the leadership of her party. Collins has criticized Ardern for using waffly language and failing to deliver on her promises of transformational change. She said the Prime Minister offered love and hugs when what the country really needed was an experienced politician and a business hand to lead them out of the financial crisis created by COVID-19. But her attacks on Ardern did not seem to resonate with voters. Political analysts have described the 2020 general election as weird, odd and bizarre, and said it lacked the usual drama and scandal, as well as much coherency. Ardern's popularity at home and abroad have transformed her into the country's first celebrity PM and, coupled with her COVID-19 success, many analysts judged her impossible to beat, saying her appeal as a leader stretched beyond politics. As well as electing a new government, the ballot papers asked New Zealanders to decide on whether to legalize marijuana and euthanasia. The results of the referendum questions will not be made public until 30 October. Polling has suggested euthanasia looked likely to become legal, but support for legalizing cannabis has cooled.